am Jenny Johnson, 36 years old. On the day I discovered my husband's betrayal, I stood frozen outside a coffee shop in Manhattan, watching him wrap his arm around another woman while two children, who looked far too much like him, clung to his hands. My stomach twisted and the world around me blurred. The man I trusted, the man I built a life with, was living a secret I never imagined. The streets buzzed with the usual New York chaos, horns blaring, vendors shouting, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting in the crisp air. Yet none of it touched me. My heartbeat drowned it all out, hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape my chest. My coffee slipped from my fingers, splashing across the pavement, unnoticed by everyone except me. He laughed. He kissed the woman's temple. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he ushered those children into the back seat of his car. My car. I wanted to move, to scream, to throw open the coffee shop door and demand answers in front of everyone. But my legs were locked, cemented to the sidewalk. The reflection of myself in the glass window stared back at me, a woman with wide, shocked eyes and trembling lips. I had seen women like that in movies, when the heroine realizes her lover is a fraud. I never thought I'd be one of them. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Charlie and I had been married for 10 years. We built what looked like a steady life together. A brownstone apartment in Brooklyn, weekends in Central Park, holidays with family upstate. People often said we were the picture of stability, but pictures lie. Pictures capture smiles, not the tension in the air when he came home late again. They don't record the silence over dinner when I asked questions he dodged with practiced ease. I met Charlie when I was 24. I was working long shifts as a nurse in a downtown hospital, exhausted but ambitious, my parents' Cuban sacrifices weighing heavily on me. Charlie was a paramedic then, tall and handsome, with a smile that seemed to light up even the darkest ER hallway. He had this charm that made people trust him instantly, and I was no exception. We fell fast. Within a year, he proposed in Central Park under cherry blossoms. I thought I was lucky. I thought I had found the man who would honor me the way my father honored my mother. For years, I ignored the signs. The extra shifts that stretched until morning, the unexplained credit card charges, the cologne lingering on his clothes when he swore he'd only been at work. I convinced myself it was the price of his demanding career, the cost of loving someone who saved lives for a living. But that day outside the cafe proved what I had been too afraid to admit. He wasn't saving lives. He was living two of them. My chest tightened as I watched the little boy climb into the car. He must have been 6, maybe 7. His smile, the exact same crooked grin Charlie had when he teased me during our early days, was like a knife to my heart. The girl, a bit younger, clutched a pink backpack as Charlie fastened her seatbelt. He looked natural, comfortable, like a father who had done this 100 times. And maybe he had. The woman wasn't a stranger either. I recognized her vaguely. She had come to the hospital once, years ago, when her mother was sick. Her name was Rachel. Back then, she had been polite, kind-eyed, nothing threatening. Never once did I imagine she would be the one stealing my husband behind my back, building a family with him while I was home making dinner alone. The car pulled away, and with it, my illusion of marriage. I staggered back against the cold brick wall of the cafe, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. My phone buzzed in my bag. A message from Charlie. "Running late tonight, don't wait up." The audacity made me laugh out loud, a bitter, hollow sound that startled a passerby. He was lying to me while I watched him live the truth. I didn't go home that evening. I walked. For hours, I wandered Manhattan streets, past glowing shop windows and crowded restaurants, past laughter spilling from bars and couples holding hands. Everywhere I looked, life seemed normal, steady, predictable. Mine was shattering quietly, invisible to everyone but me. By midnight, I sat on a bench near the East River, the cold wind whipping through my hair. My hands shook as I dialed my sister Maya. She answered groggily. "Jenny, what's wrong?" I tried to form words, but only sobs came. Finally, I choked out. "He has another family, Mari. Kids. A whole life I knew nothing about." Silence stretched on the other end. Then softly, "Oh my God," Her voice cracked, and it only made me cry harder. She didn't say I was imagining things. She didn't tell me to calm down. She believed me instantly, and that was both a comfort and a fresh stab of pain. Because if she believed it so easily, maybe deep down, we all knew Charlie wasn't as perfect as he seemed. By the time I dragged myself home, the sky was turning pale with dawn. Charlie wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He would come in later, smelling faintly of aftershave, with some excuse about a night shift or paperwork, and I would have to look him in the eye, knowing I had seen the truth. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock, listening to the refrigerator hum and the city wake outside. Every second that ticked by was another reminder that my life was no longer what I thought it was. My marriage wasn't real. My husband wasn't mine. And the future I had built in my mind had crumbled in the span of a single afternoon. But even as grief threatened to swallow me whole, another feeling began to spark beneath it. A quiet, trembling ember of rage, because Charlie had underestimated me. He thought I would stay blind forever. He thought I would accept scraps of his love while he lived fully elsewhere. He thought wrong. This was just the beginning. The first time I realized Charlie was nervous around me was subtle. We were in the kitchen, a Sunday morning like any other, and he reached for the coffee pot. His hand trembled just slightly. It wasn't the caffeine. It was me. Because something in me had shifted, and he sensed it. I kept my voice calm. My movements ordinary, but inside I was calculating. Every step I knew his patterns. Now his late nights weren't at the office. His business dinners were with Rachel and the kids, and his money wasn't just supporting us. It was building a life with them. The old me would have confronted him right away, demanding answers. The new me understood patience. If I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done, I couldn't strike too soon. I had to let him believe he still held control. While I quietly built my arsenal, Carla, the investigator, became my lifeline. Every week, we met in discreet spots, diners, libraries, even the hospital parking garage. She handed me files and photos, each one a nail in Charlie's coffin, bank, records showing transfers to Rachel, receipts from vacations he claimed were conferences, even a lease agreement, an apartment on the Upper West Side where his other family lived. The cruelty of it all hit me hardest when I saw pictures of the apartment children's drawings taped to the fridge, Rachel's handwriting, on sticky notes reminding him to buy milk. It wasn't just betrayal, it was domesticity, a whole other life he had chosen to nurture instead of ours. But I didn't cry anymore. I copied every file, stored it in multiple places, and tucked hard copies into a safety deposit box under my name. Because if Charlie ever tried to destroy me, I'd make sure he burned with me. Meanwhile, I played my role, the loyal wife, the oblivious nurse, the woman too blind to see her husband's duplicity. At dinner, when he said he had to fly to Boston for a conference, I smiled faintly and nodded. Of course. Just don't forget your presentation notes. Inside, I seethed, knowing he was going to a soccer tournament for his son. Maya hated my act. "Why are you pretending?" she asked one night as we walked through Central Park. "Why not just throw the evidence in his face and leave?" "Because leaving isn't enough," I said quietly. He humiliated me, Maya. He made me question my sanity. If I walk away quietly, he wins. He keeps his perfect little second life. He loses nothing. Her expression softened. "So what are you going to do?" I stopped walking, looking out over the lake, the city lights reflected on the water. "I'm going to dismantle him, piece by piece, until he has nothing left to hide behind." The first step was small: money. I began quietly moving funds from our joint account into an account only I controlled. Not a huge amount, just enough that he wouldn't notice immediately, but enough that when the time came, I wouldn't be left penniless. The second step was reputation. Charlie thrived on his image as a devoted husband and successful businessman. He loved throwing dinner parties, bragging about our perfect life. So I started planting seeds with subtle precision. At a party one evening, when a colleague asked about Charlie's long hours, I smiled ruefully. "Oh yes, sometimes he's gone all night. I don't even know where he is half the time." But I suppose that's marriage, right? The colleague chuckled awkwardly, but the seed was planted. Doubt, whispers, the kind that grow. Charlie noticed. Of course. One night, as we cleaned up after guests, he slammed a wine glass into the sink. "What the hell are you playing at, Jenny?" I feigned innocence. "What do you mean? Don't you dare embarrass me like that again." I tilted my head, letting a small, cold smile creep onto my face. "Maybe you shouldn't give people reasons to wonder." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing, and that silence was victory enough. The third step was legal. Carla connected me with a divorce attorney, Ms. Harris, a sharp woman who listened to my story with cool precision. When I showed her the files, her eyes narrowed. "This isn't just grounds for divorce," she said. "This is grounds for financial restitution. He's been funneling marital assets to another family. That's fraud." Hearing it framed in legal terms sent a jolt of strength through me. I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a wronged party with evidence, leverage, and rights. We began building a case quietly, preparing petitions and financial breakdowns. Ms. Harris warned me, "You need to be careful. Men like him get reckless when they sense they're losing control. Don't confront him until we're ready." I promised her I wouldn't. But inside, my patience was stretched thin. One evening, as I sorted through more of Carla's files, I found a photo that nearly broke my resolve. Charlie, sitting on a couch, Rachel leaning against him. Their kids sprawled across his lap. He looked happy. Not the cold, distant man I had been living with, but relaxed, laughing, alive. I stared at that photo until my hands shook with rage. All the years I had begged him for affection, for attention. All the nights I had fallen asleep alone, thinking I was the problem, and here he was, giving everything I had ever wanted to someone else. For a moment, I wanted to storm into that apartment and tear it all apart. But I forced myself to breathe, to wait, because the setup wasn't finished yet. I began documenting everything. His schedule, his lies, his absences. Every time he claimed to be out of town, I noted it. Every unexplained charge, every strange call, I logged it. I wasn't just gathering evidence for court. I was building a story, a narrative no one could deny. At the same time, I worked on myself. I started running again, pushing my body to its limits, reminding myself that I was strong, that I was still here. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, winning praise from my supervisors. I rebuilt the parts of me Charlie had tried to erode. And the more I grew, the more he faltered. One night he came home late, clearly agitated. I watched him pace the living room, loosening his tie. "Something wrong?" I asked, my tone deliberately calm. He shot me a glare. "Why are you always so damn calm lately? What's going on with you?" I met his eyes steadily. Maybe I finally realized who I married. The flicker of unease in his expression told me everything. He knew. He didn't know what I had, or how much I knew. But he sensed it. His control was slipping. That night, lying in bed beside him, I whispered to myself, "Soon," because the setup was almost complete. And when the time came, Charlie wouldn't just lose me. He would lose the life he built on lies. The days that followed felt like I was living inside someone else's skin. Charlie moved around our apartment as if nothing had changed, smiling faintly, kissing my cheek, dropping little lies disguised as casual remarks. But to me, every word, every gesture was loaded with rot. I couldn't unsee what I had seen outside that cafe, the image of Rachel's hand tucked into his, the children's laughter as he buckled them into my car, our car, played in a loop inside my head. I began to wonder if our entire marriage had been a performance, staged just enough to keep me quiet and pliant while he lived another life elsewhere. Nights were the hardest. When Charlie slipped into bed beside me, I would lie stiff, pretending to be asleep. I could feel his warmth inches away, his steady breathing as he drifted off easily, unburdened by conscience. Meanwhile, my eyes burned holes in the ceiling, replaying every red flag I had ignored. The way he sometimes worked late, but came home smelling faintly of perfume. The secretive phone calls in the hallway, the coldness that had crept into his voice years earlier, disguised as stress. Maya's advice gnawed at me. Get proof. But proof meant facing the truth head-on. It meant acknowledging that the man I loved had carved me out of his life long ago. On the third night, my breaking point arrived. It came quietly, almost unremarkably over dinner. Charlie set a takeout bag on the table. Thought we'd do Thai tonight, he said casually, unpacking the containers. You love pad see ew, right? The smell hit me instantly. Sweet soy garlic, a whiff of basil, and with it, a memory. Him tossing the same takeout bag into the trash months ago. Muttering, Rachel can't get enough of this place. I froze, chopsticks clutched in my hand. Rachel. He didn't even realize his mistake. He didn't notice the way my face stiffened, the way my knuckles whitened. You okay? He asked, sliding the container toward me. I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired, but inside something cracked. It wasn't the first time he had slipped. Not really. But this time, I recognized it for what it was. A breadcrumb. A thread connecting his two worlds. And in that instant, I knew. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep swallowing his lies, nodding along while he erased me. After dinner, while he dozed off in front of the TV, I opened his briefcase. My hands shook, not from fear of being caught, but from the rush of adrenaline coursing through me, inside neat stacks of paperwork, invoices, reports, and tucked beneath them, a folded piece of paper with colorful scribbles. I pulled it out carefully. It was a child's drawing, stick figures, a house, a sun with rays beaming across the page. The handwriting scrawled across the top read, To Daddy, Love, Lila. My heart stopped. Lila. The name was foreign to me, yet written with the unmistakable ownership of a child who knew him intimately. I clutched the drawing, tears blurring my vision, proof, not in numbers or receipts, but in crayons. Proof that I was not imagining things, not paranoid, not insecure. I slid the paper back quickly, careful to leave no trace. But something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft. He had stolen years of my life, stolen my chance at real family, stolen the truth itself. The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital. I couldn't bring myself to paste on the professional smile, to answer patients with compassion when my own heart was being carved apart. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same chipped mug in my hands, but this time with a notebook beside me. I wrote down everything I knew. The cafe. Rachel's face. The children. The drawing. The late-night calls. The unexplained receipts. The perfume. The car. Each bullet point was a dagger, but seeing it all together on the page solidified what I already knew. This wasn't salvageable. Charlie hadn't just slipped up. He had chosen another life, and hidden it so well that I had been living in the shadows of my own marriage. By the time Maya dropped by that afternoon, my eyes were raw from crying. She found me hunched over the notebook, scribbling furiously. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "Documenting everything," I whispered. My voice was hoarse but steady. "I need to see it for myself. I need to know I'm not crazy." She picked up the notebook, her brow furrowing as she scanned the pages. Then she nodded slowly. "Jenny, this is good. This is the start. But it won't mean anything unless you're ready to act." I slammed the pen down, the sound sharp in the stillness. "I am ready. I can't live like this anymore. I won't." The words shocked even me, but they were true. When Charlie came home that evening, he leaned in to kiss me like always. This time I turned my head. The kiss landed on my cheek, awkward and off. He pulled back slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I replied flatly. But I wasn't fine. I was done. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. But this time the rage burned hotter. For years I had made excuses. For years I had believed his stories. But the drawing had been the final nail in the coffin. I remembered the way my father used to tell me, "Don't ever let anyone take your dignity, Jenny. Once you lose it, you lose yourself." And for the first time in years, I felt his words pressing against me, demanding action. Around 2 a.m., I slipped quietly out of bed and into the living room. The city lights filtered through the blinds, striping the walls with faint gold. I stood at the window, my reflection staring back at me, tired, broken, but alive. And in that reflection, I whispered to myself, "This ends now." I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what revenge would look like yet, but I knew one thing for certain. My marriage was over, whether Charlie admitted it or not. The betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a secret life, a family, a future he had carved without me, and I would never forgive him for it. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouting or slamming doors. It was quiet. It was the silence of realization, the sharp edge of truth slicing through years of lies. And once I crossed that line, there was no going back. When Charlie stirred in bed and reached for me in his sleep, I stayed still, unresponsive. He had lost me. He just didn't know it yet, but soon he would. Because the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had lied to, was finally awake. And she was done being a victim. The breaking point had arrived. And the countdown to his downfall had begun. When people talk about heartbreak, they make it sound sharp and quick, like a knife, clean and sudden. But what I felt in the days after realizing the truth was nothing like that. It was slower, heavier, like drowning. The air in our apartment felt thicker, pressing down on me with every breath. Charlie still moved around as if nothing was wrong. He hummed while shaving in the bathroom, packed his briefcase each morning, and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. But now I saw it all, differently. I saw the lies dripping from his lips like venom, heard the laughter on his phone calls. Laughter that was never for me. Couldn't bear to confront him yet, not without a plan, so instead I shrank inside myself, folding smaller and smaller until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My skin grew pale, my voice, once confident at work, grew fragile. At the hospital, my coworkers noticed. "You okay, Jenny?" asked Dr. Patel one morning, glancing at me over his clipboard. I forced a smile. Just not sleeping well. That was the truth. I wasn't sleeping at all. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart a hammer in my chest. When I did drift off, I dreamed of Rachel's face, of the children's laughter, of Charlie's smug smile. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my chest aching as if my body was punishing me for ignoring the truth. Food lost its taste. I would make coffee in the morning, take one sip, and leave the cup untouched. Lunch breaks at work turned into pushing food around a plate until it was cold. I was shrinking, not just in body but in spirit. Maya came over one evening, knocking gently before letting herself in. She found me sitting on the couch in my pajamas, the TV playing but muted. "Jenny," she said softly, setting down a bag of groceries. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." "I'm fine," I muttered, though my hollow voice betrayed me. She sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. "No, you're not. You're disappearing." The words hit harder than she knew, because that's exactly how I felt. Like I was dissolving into the walls, invisible even in my own life. Tears burned my eyes, and I shook my head. "I don't know how to do this, Mari. How do you survive knowing the man you loved has a whole other family? How do you keep breathing when every breath feels like betrayal?" Her own eyes glossed with tears, but she stayed steady. "You survive one day at a time. You let yourself grieve, and you stop carrying his lies like they're your fault." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they cracked me open. I broke down in her arms, sobbing so hard I thought my chest would split. She held me, rocking me gently, whispering, "It's okay. Jenny, cry. You're allowed." But the crying didn't stop when she left. I cried brushing my teeth. I cried folding laundry. I cried on the subway, hiding behind oversized sunglasses. The world blurred around me, and I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. The loneliness was worse than the anger. Charlie had built another life, and in doing so, he had taken mine away. I had no children to cling to, no partner to lean on. Just an empty apartment filled with echoes of laughter that no longer felt real. I tried to distract myself with work, but even there the cracks showed. During rounds, I forgot patient names. I misplaced files. Once, a nurse asked me the dosage for a medication I had prescribed 100 times before, and my mind went blank. Embarrassment flushed through me, and I muttered, "Check with Dr. Patel." It was unlike me. I had always been sharp, confident, precise, but betrayal had hollowed me out, and there was nothing left to give. One evening, as I walked home from the hospital, I passed a little girl tugging on her father's hand. She giggled, her hair bouncing in pigtails, and the man bent down to kiss her forehead. The sight knocked the air out of me. My chest tightened, and I leaned against a lamppost, gasping. I wanted that. I had wanted that for years, and Charlie had given it to someone else. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt sick. I dropped my bag at the door and collapsed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the walls closed in. The silence screamed. That night, something inside me snapped again, but differently this time. Not rage, not sorrow, something darker. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. My hair hung limp, my eyes were swollen, my lips cracked from dehydration. I didn't recognize myself. "You're pathetic," I whispered. The voice in my head wasn't Charlie's, or Rachel's, or even Maya's. It was mine. I was turning against myself. For the first time, I understood how betrayal could kill without a single blade. It chipped away slowly, convincing you that you weren't worth the truth, weren't worth love, weren't worth existing. I gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles whitened. "No," I whispered again, louder this time, because beneath the despair, a faint spark still flickered. But it was buried under layers of exhaustion and grief. For now, I collapsed into bed, clutching the pillow as though it could hold me together. The days blurred into one another after that. Work, silence, tears, repeat. Even Maya's visits couldn't pull me out of the fog. It wasn't until one evening, when I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor with an unopened bottle of wine in my lap, that I realized how close I was to losing myself completely. The thought terrified me, because if I gave in to this despair, then Charlie truly won. He didn't just have another family. He had stolen my identity, my dignity, my will to fight. I pushed the bottle away, my hands trembling, and in that moment I knew I needed help. Not just from Maya, not just from friends, but from myself. I needed to claw my way back from the abyss before it swallowed me whole. The isolation had nearly destroyed me. The struggle had broken me into pieces. But maybe, just maybe, it was also preparing me. Because sometimes you have to be shattered completely before you can rebuild into something stronger. And as I curled into bed that night, still crying, still broken, a thought whispered through my mind. Quiet but insistent. This is not the end. Not yet. The morning after that dark night with the wine bottle, I woke up different. Not better, not healed, but aware. I had stared too long into the void, and I realized it wanted to swallow me whole, if I let it. Charlie's betrayal wouldn't just take my marriage, it would take me. I couldn't give him that satisfaction. At work, I forced myself through the motions of morning rounds. The halls smelled of antiseptic and coffee. The monitors beeped, patients groaned, life went on, but inside, something shifted. Instead of stumbling numbly through the day, I started watching, listening, paying attention in a way I hadn't before. It was almost instinct, like my mind was searching for answers, hunting for cracks in Charlie's lies. That evening, Maya came over again, carrying takeout. "You're eating this time," she said firmly, setting the bag on the counter. I managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." As we ate in silence, she studied me. "You look different," she said finally. "Not good different. Just sharper. What's going on?" I toyed with my chopsticks, staring at the uneaten noodles. I've been sitting in this fog, letting him win. But last night, I almost broke, and it scared me. Maya's expression softened. Jenny, I shook my head. No, listen, I can't keep drowning like this. I need to figure out how he hid this family, where the money goes, how he's been living 2 lives under my nose. Her eyes lit with recognition. You mean find proof? I nodded slowly. Exactly. Proof. Because grief and anger were not enough. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to fight back, I needed something real. The first step was Charlie's phone. For weeks, I had been too paralyzed to touch it, even when it buzzed on the nightstand. But one evening, while he was in the shower, I sat on the bed, heart pounding, staring at the device. My hands shook as I picked it up. The lock screen glowed with a photo of us on vacation in Italy. I wanted to smash it against the wall, but instead, I forced my fingers to move. He had always been careless. His passcode was the same 4 digits he used for everything, our anniversary date. The phone unlocked instantly. My breath caught. This was it, the doorway into his double life. Messages, photos, call logs. I scrolled through, my chest tightening with every swipe. There she was. Rachel. Saved not as Rachel, but as RS. Hundreds of messages, photos of the kids, videos of birthday parties, soccer games, family trips. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just visiting them. He was living a whole other life, one that looked sickeningly perfect. Smiles, laughter, joy. Meanwhile, I had been alone in our apartment, wondering why he worked late so often. Nearly dropped the phone as bile rose in my throat. But I kept scrolling, and then I saw it. Bank transfers. Regular. Payments sent to an account under her name. Got you? I whispered. I took photos of everything. Screenshots of messages. Account numbers, photos, timestamps. I sent them to my email, to a hidden folder in my cloud storage, even to a flash drive I tucked into my purse. The fear I had carried for weeks twisted into something else. Something sharper, stronger. Power. When Charlie stepped out of the shower, steam curling around him, I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and pretended to be asleep. But my mind raced. Because now, I had proof. The next step came almost by accident. At the hospital, I overheard a patient's family talking about hiring a private investigator. Something in me sparked. That night, I looked up investigators in New York, scrolling through profiles until I found one with decent reviews. Her name was Carla, and her specialty was domestic cases. The irony of calling a stranger to dig into my husband's lies wasn't lost on me, but I dialed anyway. Her voice was calm, professional. Carla Johnson Investigations. How can I help you? I swallowed hard. Hi, I need to know if my husband has been hiding something from me. Another family. There was silence, then a measured reply. I'll need details. Photos, schedules, accounts. Can you meet tomorrow? The next evening, we sat in a quiet diner. Carla was in her 40s, sharp eyes, notebook in hand. I slid the flash drive across the table, my palms sweating. This has everything I've found so far, she nodded, pocketing it. I'll dig deeper. If he's been covering his tracks, I'll find it. But it won't be easy, and it won't be fast. How much? I asked. She quoted a number that made my stomach lurch, but I agreed anyway, because what was money compared to the truth? As the weeks passed, Carla fed me information. Travel. Receipts under false names. Hotel bookings. Separate credit card linked to Rachel's address. All of it painting a picture of a man who had been living a double life for nearly 5 years. Each revelation hurt. But it also fueled me, because the more I knew, the less power he had over me. At work, I started standing taller again. Dr. Patel noticed. You're back, he said one morning, almost surprised. I managed a small smile. Something like that. The truth was, I wasn't healed, but I was shifting, from victim to fighter, from powerless to prepared. One night, as I sat with Maya on the couch, I showed her some of the evidence Carla had gathered. Her eyes widened. "Jenny, this is huge. This isn't just betrayal. This is fraud, financial deceit, maybe even grounds for criminal charges." Her words rang in my ears long after she left. Fraud. Deceit. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about justice. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began writing. Not just my feelings, but plans, dates, times, steps. I wasn't sure what the end game was yet. But I knew one thing. Charlie wasn't going to walk away from this untouched. The discovery of his lies had broken me once. But now, discovering the proof of his deceit was rebuilding me. Piece by piece, I was finding myself again, and for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without tears, because now, the game had changed. This wasn't just about what he had done to me. This was about what I was going to do to him. The first time I realized Charlie was nervous around me was subtle. We were in the kitchen, a Sunday morning like any other, and he reached for the coffee pot. His hand trembled just slightly. It wasn't the caffeine. It was me. Because something in me had shifted, and he sensed it. I kept my voice calm, my movements ordinary. But inside, I was calculating every step. I knew his patterns now. His late nights weren't at the office. His business dinners were with Rachel and the kids. And his money wasn't just supporting us. It was building a life with them. The old me would have confronted him right away, demanding answers. The new me understood patience. If I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done, I couldn't strike too soon. I had to let him believe he still held control, while I quietly built my arsenal. Carla, the investigator, became my lifeline. Every week we met in discreet spots, diners, libraries, even the hospital parking garage. She handed me files and photos, each one a nail in Charlie's coffin. Bank records showing transfers to Rachel. Receipts from vacations he claimed were conferences, even a lease agreement. An apartment on the Upper West Side where his other family lived. The cruelty of it all hit me hardest when I saw pictures of the apartment, children's drawings taped to the fridge, Rachel's handwriting on sticky notes reminding him to buy milk. It wasn't just betrayal. It was domesticity, a whole other life he had chosen to nurture instead of ours. But I didn't cry anymore. I copied every file, stored it in multiple places, and tucked hard copies into a safety deposit box under my name. Because if Charlie ever tried to destroy me, I'd make sure he burned with me. Meanwhile, I played my role. The loyal wife, the oblivious nurse, the woman too blind to see her husband's duplicity. At dinner, when he said he had to fly to Boston for a conference, I smiled faintly and nodded. Of course, just don't forget your presentation notes. Inside, I seethed, knowing he was going to a soccer tournament for his son. Maya hated my act. "Why are you pretending?" she asked one night as we walked through Central Park. "Why not just throw the evidence in his face and leave?" "Because leaving isn't enough," I said quietly. "He humiliated me, Maya. He made me question my sanity. If I walk away quietly, he wins. He keeps his perfect little second life. He loses nothing." Her expression softened. "So what are you going to do?" I stopped walking, looking out over the lake, the city lights reflected on the water. I'm going to dismantle him, piece by piece, until he has nothing left to hide behind. The first step was small. Money. I began quietly moving funds from our joint account into an account only I controlled. Not a huge amount, just enough that he wouldn't notice immediately. But enough that when the time came, I wouldn't be left penniless. The second step was reputation. Charlie thrived on his image as a devoted husband and successful businessman. He loved throwing dinner parties, bragging about our perfect life. So I started planting seeds with subtle precision. At a party one evening, when a colleague asked about Charlie's long hours, I smiled ruefully. "Oh yes, sometimes he's gone all night. I don't even know where he is half the time. But I suppose that's marriage, right?" The colleague chuckled awkwardly, but the seed was planted. Doubt. Whispers. The kind that grow. Charlie noticed, of course. One night, as we cleaned up after guests, he slammed a wine glass into the sink. "What the hell are you playing at, Jenny?" I feigned innocence. What do you mean? Don't you dare embarrass me like that again. I tilted my head, letting a small, cold smile creep onto my face. Maybe you shouldn't give people reasons to wonder. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. And that silence was victory enough. The third step was legal. Carla connected me with a divorce attorney, Ms. Harris, a sharp woman who listened to my story with cool precision. When I showed her the files, her eyes narrowed. This isn't just grounds for divorce, she said. This is grounds for financial restitution. He's been funneling marital assets to another family. That's fraud. Hearing it framed in legal terms sent a jolt of strength through me. I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a wronged party with evidence, leverage, and rights. We began building a case quietly, preparing petitions and financial breakdowns. Ms. Harris warned me, "You need to be careful. Men like him get reckless when they sense they're losing control. Don't confront him until we're ready." I promised her I wouldn't, but inside, my patience was stretched thin. One evening, as I sorted through more of Carla's files, I found a photo that nearly broke my resolve. Charlie sitting on a couch, Rachel leaning against him, their kids sprawled across his lap. He looked happy, not the cold, distant man I had been living with, but relaxed, laughing, alive. I stared at that photo until my hands shook with rage. All the years I had begged him for affection, for attention, all the nights I had fallen asleep alone, thinking I was the problem, and here he was, giving everything I had ever wanted to someone else. For a moment, I wanted to storm into that apartment and tear it all apart, but I forced myself to breathe, to wait, because the setup wasn't finished yet. I began documenting everything, his schedule, his lies, his absences. Every time he claimed to be out of town, I noted it. Every unexplained charge, every strange call, I logged it. I wasn't just gathering evidence for court. I was building a story, a narrative no one could deny. At the same time, I worked on myself. I started running again, pushing my body to its limits, reminding myself that I was strong, that I was still here. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, winning praise from my supervisors. I rebuilt the parts of me Charlie had tried to erode, and the more I grew, the more he faltered. One night, he came home late, clearly agitated. I watched him pace the living room, loosening his tie. "Something wrong?" I asked, my tone deliberately calm. He shot me a glare. "Why are you always so damn calm lately? What's going on with you?" I met his eyes steadily. Maybe I finally realized who I married. The flicker of unease in his expression told me everything. He knew. He didn't know what I had, or how much I knew. But he sensed it. His control was slipping. That night, lying in bed beside him, I whispered to myself, "Soon." Because the setup was almost complete. And when the time came, Charlie wouldn't just lose me. He would lose the life he built on lies. The morning it all began, the city felt different. Crisper air, sharper sounds, like the world itself was on edge. Or maybe it was me. I stood at the kitchen counter, calmly buttering toast, while Charlie shuffled into the room, half distracted on his phone. He didn't notice the faint smile tugging at my lips. He didn't notice that his carefully constructed house of lies was about to collapse, because today was the day I struck back. It started with the first blow, exposure. Carla had provided me with everything: photos, documents, bank transfers. Ms. Harris, my attorney, had filed the legal petition the night before, timed so Charlie would be served right in the middle of his office hours. Public humiliation, the one thing he couldn't bear. But before that, I had my own move to make. "Morning," he muttered, still scrolling through his phone. "Big meeting today?" I asked casually. "Yeah, investors. Don't wait up tonight." I almost laughed. Even now, he couldn't stop lying. But I just nodded. Of course. Inside, my heart raced. He had no idea that by lunchtime, everyone he wanted to impress would know exactly what kind of man he was. At noon, I sat across from Ms. Harris in a small cafe downtown, sipping black coffee as we waited for her assistant's text. When it came, my phone buzzed with two simple words: "It's done." I pictured him, sitting at that long boardroom table, slick suit, smug grin, until the process server walked in, sliding a thick envelope across the polished wood. I imagined his face reddening, his jaw tightening as his colleague's curious eyes turned toward him. A moment he could never erase. Ms. Harris smiled faintly. Phase 1 complete. But that was only the beginning. The second blow was financial. That morning, before leaving home, I had transferred the last of our joint funds into my personal account. Ms. Harris had already frozen certain assets, ensuring Charlie couldn't drain them in a panic. His beloved image of wealth and stability would crack fast when he realized I had cut off the flow. By afternoon, I was walking through Midtown, phone buzzing with updates from Carla. She had scheduled an anonymous package delivery to Charlie's company, containing photos of him with Rachel, receipts for luxury vacations, and copies of the lease agreement for his second home. Enough for whispers to spread through the office like wildfire, and they did. By evening, Maya called me. "You should have seen him, Jenny," she said breathlessly. "I heard from a friend who works at his building. People were passing around those photos like candy. He stormed out around 4, red as a tomato. He looked finished." I exhaled slowly, the sound half a laugh, half a sob. Good, the third blow was personal. That night, instead of waiting for him at home, I went to Rachel's apartment. The building was sleek, expensive, the kind of place he had insisted we couldn't afford. I buzzed her unit. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "Hello? It's Jenny, Charlie's wife. We need to talk." There was a pause, then the click of the door unlocking. When she opened it, she looked younger than me, tired but wary. 2 children peeked out from behind her legs. His children. The sight should have crushed me, but instead it steeled me. "Don't worry," I said softly, glancing at the kids. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to tell you the truth." She swallowed hard. "The truth?" I stepped inside, scanning the apartment. Pictures of them together lined the walls. Vacations. Birthdays. A life built on my erasure. "Charlie told you he was divorced, didn't he?" I asked, her eyes widened. She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. I pulled the envelope from my bag, copies of the documents Carla had gathered, and placed it on the coffee table. "Here's the reality. He's still married to me, and he's been using both of us. The law is involved now. His perfect little act is over." Rachel's face crumpled. She sat down heavily, tears welling in her eyes. The children, sensing tension, retreated into their room. She whispered, "I thought he loved me. He said you were bitter, that you wanted money." I believed him. Her words were a knife, but I forced myself to stay steady. "Believe what you want, but I'm done being his victim. You should be too." I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "He'll be here soon, trying to spin another story. Don't let him. You deserve better." When I stepped back onto the street, my hands trembled. Not with fear, but with adrenaline. I had just dismantled the second half of his secret life. By the time Charlie came home that night, he was a storm. He slammed the door, his face twisted with rage. "What the hell did you do?" he roared, throwing the papers from Harris across the table. Everyone at work saw those photos. Rachel threw me out. "The kids, Jenny, you've ruined everything!" I stood calmly in the kitchen, arms crossed. "No, Charlie. You ruined everything the day you decided to build a second life behind my back." He stalked closer, eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "You've destroyed me." I tilted my head, letting the faintest smile cross my lips. "Good." For the first time, he faltered. The man who had always wielded power over me stood there, trembling, undone by his own lies. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll make you regret this." I stepped closer, meeting his glare with calm fire. "No, Charlie. This is just beginning, and the only one who's going to regret anything is you." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. For once, he had no retort. That night, I locked the bedroom door and slept alone, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. But beneath the fear was triumph. The strike had landed. He was exposed. His money was slipping away. His mistress had seen the truth, and the walls of his double life were caving in. I lay in the dark, whispering to myself the promise I had carried for weeks. He will know the price of betrayal. And tonight, for the first time, he did. The news spread faster than I ever expected. By the following week, Charlie's carefully built image had collapsed like a rotten foundation. I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. The truth had grown its own wings. It started at his company. Carla sent me a screenshot of the employee group chat. His name dragged through the mud, screenshots of the photos circulated, jokes flying about his double life. A man who prided himself on control had become office gossip, the punchline of every whispered conversation. By Tuesday morning, Ms. Harris called me with an update. Charlie's firm has suspended him pending an internal review. The investors want nothing to do with scandal. He's on thin ice. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the morning light pouring through my apartment window. It was surreal. For years he had been untouchable. Now, he was dangling by a thread. But the true reckoning didn't come from corporate suits or anonymous whispers. It came from the community, the people who had once admired him. That Saturday, our neighborhood association held its monthly gathering at the local community hall. Normally, Charlie thrived at those events, schmoozing, shaking hands, parading me around like an accessory while people praised his dedication to family. This time, he arrived alone. I wasn't planning to attend. But then Maya called, her voice urgent. "Jenny, you need to come. This is your moment. Don't let him control the narrative." So I did. When I walked into the hall, the air felt thick with tension. Conversations hushed. Eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. Charlie stood near the refreshments table, his tie crooked, his smile forced. For once, he didn't look polished. He looked cornered. I crossed the room, my heels echoing against the linoleum. Every step felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. When I reached the center of the hall, people naturally circled, curious. Charlie's eyes narrowed. "Jenny, what are you doing here?" I kept my voice steady, loud enough for others to hear. "I'm here because for years you made me invisible." "Not anymore," murmurs rippled. Neighbors exchanged glances. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We don't need to do this in public." "That's the problem," I shot back. "You only cared about appearances in public. Behind closed doors, you lied, cheated, and built a second family while pretending this one mattered." Gasps broke out around us. Charlie's mask cracked, his jaw clenched, his face flushing crimson. "That's not true," he snapped. "She's exaggerating." "Really?" I interrupted, pulling out my phone. On the screen were the photos Carla had gathered. Him with Rachel, him with the children, documents tying his finances to their apartment. I raised it high enough for the nearest neighbors to see. Whispers turned to audible shock. One woman covered her mouth. Another shook her head in disbelief. The weight of collective judgment bore down on him. Charlie reached for my phone, but I stepped back. "You can't erase this anymore," I said firmly. "Everyone sees you for what you are." The room fell silent except for the pounding of my heart. Then someone clapped. It was Mr. Rodriguez, the retired teacher who lived 2 houses down. Others joined in, hesitant at first, then louder. Not for him. For me. Charlie's face twisted in fury. "Congratulations, Jenny," he spat. "You've destroyed me." "Is that what you wanted?" I took a deep breath, meeting his glare with calm fire. "No. What I wanted was respect, honesty, and loyalty. You chose to throw that away. You destroyed yourself." He stormed out of the hall, slamming the door so hard it rattled. The sound lingered in the silence that followed. But I didn't chase him. For the first time, I didn't need to. After he left, neighbors surrounded me. Some offered hugs, others words of encouragement. Maya squeezed my hand tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood tall and they finally saw the truth. But the reckoning wasn't finished. Charlie still had to face the law. A week later, I sat in court beside Ms. Harris as she laid out the evidence. Fraud, financial misconduct, hidden assets. Charlie sat across the room, his once proud shoulders slumped. Every lie unraveled in legal terms. Every hidden account exposed. Rachel didn't show up to defend him. Neither did anyone from his family. He was alone. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me full control of our shared property and significant compensation, Charlie's face drained of color. I almost felt pity. Almost. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt different. Warmer. Cleaner. For the first time in years, it wasn't burning me. It was shining on me. Yet the most powerful moment of reckoning wasn't legal or financial. It was emotional. A few days later, I met Rachel at a small diner. She looked worn, exhausted from holding her own life together after Charlie's collapse. But when she saw me, she managed a tired smile. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Don't apologize to me," I replied gently. "You were lied to just like I was. He made fools of both of us." Her eyes welled with tears. "The kids ask where he is. I don't know what to tell them." I sighed, feeling the ache in my chest. Tell them the truth in a way they can understand. That sometimes people pretend to be better than they are, but it's not the kids' fault. She nodded, gripping her coffee cup. For the first time, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was another victim of his web, and together, we had broken free. By the end of that week, Charlie's name was mud. The company quietly cut ties, his community turned its back, and his second life crumbled into dust. The man who once strutted through Manhattan as if the city belonged to him now walked alone, shadows his only companions. Meanwhile, I stood taller. Neighbors greeted me warmly, clients at work admired my resilience, and friends rallied behind me. I was no longer the silent wife in the background. I was the woman who had survived betrayal and fought back. One evening, as I walked home past the glowing skyline, I paused on the corner where it had all begun, the coffee shop where I had first seen him with Rachel and the children. For a moment, the memory threatened to crush me again, but then I realized something. That moment no longer owned me. I owned it. I had turned pain into power, silence into strength, betrayal into justice. The public reckoning was over. Charlie had been stripped of his mask, his lies burned away by truth. And I was still standing, stronger, wiser, freer. The dust had settled, but the silence that followed was louder than the chaos. For months, my life had been consumed by exposing Charlie, gathering evidence and fighting back. Now that the storm had passed, I found myself standing in the quiet aftermath, wondering who I was without the constant battle. At first, the loneliness pressed heavy. Nights in my apartment stretched endlessly, the ticking clock echoing in the stillness. The bed felt too big, the sheets too cold. I would roll over instinctively, half expecting Charlie to be there, only to remember with a jolt that he never really had been. Not emotionally, not truthfully. That realization hurt more than the empty space. I tried distracting myself with work, pouring into my students, pushing harder at the gym, coaching late into the evenings. But even in the noise of weights clanging and voices rising in encouragement, there were moments when my chest would tighten. The memory of betrayal rising unbidden. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight line. It was a jagged path, littered with sharp edges of grief and fleeting bursts of relief. Maya often stopped by after classes. She would plop down on my couch with takeout containers, nudging me until I smiled. "You're too quiet," she'd tease. "That's not the Jenny I know." "I'm just tired," I would admit, and she would nod, not pushing further, but her presence was enough. One Friday evening, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Jenny, revenge feels sweet at first, but real healing, that's when you start building something new from the ashes." I chewed on her words long after she left, realizing how right she was. So I started small. I cleaned out the closets, bagging up the clothes Charlie had left behind. Each shirt, each tie, felt like a ghost of who I thought he was. I donated them all, refusing to let his shadow linger in my space. Then I rearranged the apartment, moved the bed against a different wall, repainted the living room. It wasn't about hiding the past. It was about reshaping the present into something that belonged solely to me. One night, I pulled out a box from under my bed filled with old journals. Flipping through them, I found entries from the early days of my marriage, pages filled with hope, love, and dreams. My handwriting was lighter then, my words almost naive, but as I read, I didn't feel foolish. I felt proud. That woman had believed in love. She had given her heart fully. And though she had been betrayed, she hadn't been broken. She had fought back. The community, too, shifted in its view of me. At first, I was nervous to walk into neighborhood gatherings, unsure of how people would look at me. But instead of pity, I found respect. Mrs. Harris stopped me one afternoon and said, "You taught all of us something, Jenny. That truth matters, even when it hurts." Those words filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. Rachel reached out again. Tentatively, we met at the park, her kids running circles around us. She looked drained but lighter than before. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, you were caught in his lies too." She exhaled, her shoulders slumping in relief. "I want my kids to grow up knowing the truth, not Charlie's version of it." We talked for hours, two women bound not by rivalry but by survival. It was strange, but healing often is. Still, there were nights when the anger returned, sharp and unrelenting. I would remember the way Charlie smirked at me across the closing table, the way he dismissed my pain, the way he thought I would stay silent forever. Those memories reignited the fire, but instead of letting it consume me, I channeled it. I started writing. At first it was messy, scribbled notes about betrayal, about resilience, about finding strength. But slowly, it became structured. Stories of women who had been silenced, erased, overlooked. I realized I wasn't just writing for myself. I was writing for every woman who had ever been told to stay quiet. Maya encouraged me to share my words. "Start a blog," she urged. "People need to hear your story." And so I did. At first only a handful of readers, but then messages began pouring in. Women from across the country thanking me, sharing their own stories of betrayal, of endurance, of rising again. For the first time, I felt like my pain had purpose. Months passed, and I grew stronger. I no longer flinched at Charlie's name. I no longer replayed the betrayal in my head like a broken record. The scars were still there, but they had become part of my story, not the whole of it. One evening, I walked past the coffee shop where it had all begun, the place I had first seen him with Rachel and the children. I paused, staring at the familiar window. Inside, people laughed, cups clinked, life moved on. I placed a hand against the cold glass, and instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. That was the moment my illusion shattered. That was the moment I began reclaiming myself. Later that night, I sat on my balcony overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The city buzzed below, alive and indifferent, just as it had been the day my world collapsed. But I was different now, stronger, freer, no longer bound by lies. I sipped my tea, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, and whispered to myself, "You survived. Jenny, you didn't just survive, you thrived." The aftermath hadn't been easy. There were scars, yes, but there was also resilience. There was also me, still standing, still fighting, still living. And as I stared at the glowing city, I realized something important. Revenge had been the fire that burned away the lies, but reflection, this quiet strength I now carried, that was what would keep me whole. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The trial, the whispers, the revelations, they were all behind me now. But closure wasn't something handed over with a verdict or an apology. It was something I had to carve out for myself, piece by piece, until it finally felt real. I remember waking up one morning months after it all, the sunlight spilling across my bed, and realizing with a shock, I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that had weighed me down had loosened its grip. I was still scarred, still healing, but I wasn't defined by Charlie's betrayal anymore. I was defined by how I had risen after it. That realization came slowly. It showed itself in quiet ways, the ease with which I walked into places we used to visit, the comfort I felt in telling my story without tears strangling my voice, the laughter that bubbled up unexpectedly during dinners with friends. I had thought healing would come like a storm passing. Instead, it came like dawn. Gradually, steadily, until I could finally see the light. Rachel and I maintained a strange kind of truce. She stayed focused on her children, and I stayed focused on rebuilding myself. There were no friendship bracelets exchanged, no forced sisterhood. But there was respect, and sometimes respect is enough. Her kids would wave at me when they saw me in the park, their smiles unburdened by the sins of their father. I would wave back, and for a moment I felt peace. Charlie faded into the background. Every so often I'd hear rumors about his job loss, about how his carefully built facade had crumbled. But those whispers no longer gave me joy, nor did they sting. They were just noise from a life I no longer lived. He had chosen deception, and the weight of those choices was his to bear. Mine was to live free. I poured myself into my writing, my blog growing steadily. Strangers became readers. Readers became a community. They didn't just want my story. They wanted a place to share their own. Every message I received became proof that telling the truth has power, that even the ugliest betrayals can bloom into something healing if we're brave enough to speak them aloud. One evening, Maya joined me on my balcony with a bottle of wine. We clinked glasses, laughter spilling out like old times. "You've changed," she said, studying me with a grin. "Better or worse?" I teased. "Stronger," she replied simply. "You used to carry so much weight in your eyes. Now you shine." Her words stayed with me. For the first time in a long time, I believed them. I started teaching self-defense classes on weekends, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the courage to pursue. Standing in front of a room full of women, showing them how to defend themselves physically, while weaving in lessons about defending their worth, felt powerful. I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was fuel for others. It was proof that you can be shattered and still rebuild into something stronger. But closure, I learned, wasn't just about moving forward. It was also about looking back one last time. So one quiet Sunday, I returned to that coffee shop in Manhattan, the place where everything had fallen apart. I ordered a drink, sat by the window and watched the world move. People bustled past, arms full of shopping bags, phones pressed to their ears, children tugging at their hands. And I sat there, breathing steadily, no longer haunted by the memory of Charlie walking out with his other family. That day, I whispered to myself, "You survived this place. You survived that moment, and you became someone they can never erase." The knot in my chest loosened, and for the first time, the coffee didn't taste bitter. It tasted like freedom. From then on, I stopped looking for revenge and started looking for life. I planted flowers on my balcony. I traveled to places I had always put off visiting. I laughed louder, loved my friends deeper, and walked taller. The betrayal had marked me, yes, but it had not defined me. Now, as I share this story with you, I think about every person who has sat in silence, doubting themselves after betrayal. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not weak for hurting. You are not foolish for trusting. And you are not broken beyond repair. I was shattered, but I rebuilt myself. And you can too. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Because here's the truth. When people betray us, they think they are writing our ending. But really, they are giving us the chance to write a better beginning. So let me leave you with this. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes closure isn't found in revenge, but in choosing yourself over the ashes of what they tried to burn. And now I'll ask you, what would you do if someone you loved betrayed you so deeply? Would you fight back or would you rise above? Tell me in the comments below.